Greetings, I am Rob, and this is another video in the COVID files. This time when I am coming off of the downsides of COVID, and it's me and a camera, so I'll do this as long as my voice lasts. Which brings me to talk about another one of those little topics about me and my creations that I usually don't put into these videos as much, mostly concentrating on broader topics and things to help people. In this case, I'm going to be a bit indulgent, and I'm going to talk about a campaign that I ran. This one lasted for about a year and a half, and this one features the Warhammer 40K universe and a split campaign that I did. Same group of players, but I ran one half of every other week, basically. I ran Deathwatch, which I'll explain in a second for those of you who aren't into Warhammer 40K. And the other half, I ran a game of Only War, which is looking at the universe from a different side. Now, in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which is owned by Games Workshop, the idea is the universe is in a state of constant warfare because that feeds their war game. There's always a war in every world. There's something to fight for. That's a part of the story. Sure, there are probably a couple of planets that don't see war very often, or possibly even at all, but they're pretty few. There's always something out there that wants to get at a brand new world, whether that be well, at any rate, there are a variety of forces. Primarily the two forces engaged are the forces of order and the forces of chaos in the Warhammer universe. Now, the primary forces of order in the Warhammer 40K universe is the Imperium of Man, humankind, who is the big player throughout the universe. They have control of as many planets as anyone else. There's trillions of humans alive at this time, and their military force is enormous, the centerpiece of which is the Emperor, who is almost dead, but he's in suspended animation, and his incredible psychic might holds the Imperium together in a variety of ways that I'm not going to get into. Opposite of humanity, there is chaos. Of course, chaos is interested in seducing a lot of humanity to their side, so some of their most potent champions are, or were, humans or somebody who was once on the side of humanity. And chaos is a corruptive force, and generally seen as evil, although it's not always a perfect analog. The forces of chaos are the biggest threat to the Imperium because it's a personal matter for them to crush the Imperium of Man. Along the way, you can fight other kinds. There are Xenos races that are aliens that humanity doesn't get along with very well. There are the mysterious Eldar, space elves. There's the orcs. Yeah, orcs. A variety of them, and they can be quite a nuisance as well. There are horrifying creatures called Tyranids that are they go from planet to planet, consuming everything. Space locusts, in a way. There are the Necrons, which are a race that they're kind of undead techno-liches that exist to destroy all other life in the universe. It's kind of bleak. So, at any rate, in Deathwatch, you play as Space Marines, surgically altered superhumans. They started out as human, but they got a bunch of extra organs stuffed into them, grown up to, 8 foot tall, hypno-indoctrinated combat killing machines that are the last resort for humanity. If there's a significant enough foe, they call in the Space Marines. And Only War, on the other hand, while the Space Marines certainly are an important military force for the Imperium of Man, the more influential force is the Astra Militarum, or the Imperial Navy, or the Imperial Army. They basically go from planet to planet, crushing huge threats and reclaiming planets for the Imperium, and often are employed to fight defensive battles to keep the Imperium together, or to stop the threats of Chaos or those other races we talked about briefly. So, while the Space Marine game of Deathwatch, you are a superhuman warrior with big combat stats and powerful war gear. Only War celebrates the Imperial Guard, the defenders of the Imperium that are just normal folks. They're given a las rifle, which is an almost laughably weak weapon against some of the threats that the Imperium faces regularly. And your job is to go out and be one of millions of people on your side to go to a different planet than what you were raised on, knowing that you'll probably never see your home planet again, and fight and fight and fight, and if you survive that fight, there will be another fight to be sent to, until eventually you're killed. It's part of the course. And if you are one of those people who, against all odds, survives, you will become a very skilled soldier, but there will still be yet another battlefield unless some different fate lines up for you, and that can happen. Sometimes some of the powers that be really think it's advantageous to have a veteran soldier around to give them advice or protect them, or fulfill other roles. So sometimes those lucky veteran soldiers can get out and get into something else. But I ran 2 separate stories at the same time that intertwined with each other. These characters kept seeing each other, but it's a different story than what you may be expecting if you've seen anything from the Warhammer 40K universe. Because it's often described as a grim, dark universe. Nothing ever really goes right. Every victory is going to be contested yet again. There's no complete victories, and there's always another war ready to be fought. It is a state where it's the worst time to be alive in all of history, but at the same time, these are all battles that are essential and need to be fought so that something good can be preserved. So you fight. Well, both of the settings, Deathwatch, where you are tasked to a group that puts down the very scariest of the alien races, the Xenos, to keep them away from humanity. So you leave your chapter buddies behind and you go and join this group called the Deathwatch that are exclusively tied to the force that combats aliens and Xenos most strongly. They opened up the campaign, and it was put into a sector of space that was recently rediscovered for the Imperium. That's eventually the warp, which is hyperspace in other settings, but the warp basically allows humanity to travel across the galaxy, crossing very long distances in very, very short amounts of time. And all made possible by the Emperor shining his psychic light upon his Imperium. Well, the warp stabilized in a region of space that had been colonized but had gone silent. So now the Imperium was interested in getting back into the sector and reclaiming all these planets that were now available again. And the Space Marines, that were the player characters, were sent to this space station called Space Station Ariok, and they were then, in the company of other Space Marines, given a variety of jobs and assignments that they were supposed to do, which started off basically fairly easily because this was the first thing I've ever run in the Warhammer 40K universe. So I took baby steps at first. And we played several games that got used to being superhuman, killing machines. And, did a good job welding themselves into a nice tight little group. Everybody had their own roles and such. And things were going pretty well until I told them we were going to split the campaign. And we then created characters for only War. I created a planet for their guardsmen to come from, the planet Machiavelli, which was known for the people being very loose with other people's belongings. It was an entire planet of kleptomaniacs almost, as a culture. So they were some of the best scroungers in the Imperial Guard. And maybe not the best equipped to start out with, but it wouldn't last for very long. Contact with other Imperial Guardsmen basically guaranteed they were going to get equipped. So, you know, for the most part, they made some interesting characters. Dirty angels. Nobody who was clean, certainly. But all of them committed to survival and the Guard at some point. And I had an intention for this. See, I had a story in mind. One of the key framing points of the Warhammer 40,000 universe was the Emperor, when he was forming the Imperium of Man, and he was conquering all of these planets that had spread out all throughout the galaxy. He went along and he, formed the Imperial Guard and everybody to go and build up this Imperium by bringing these planets back into the fold of humanity, with himself as the figurehead. And to help do this, he created the Space Marines, yes, but he created the progenitors of the Space Marines. Those were the Primarchs. The Primarchs were 20 males who were his sons. They actually had some of his genetic coding in them, which made them bigger, stronger, faster, just absolutely incredibly beyond the potential of most humans. But at the same time, they all still demonstrated that they were quite human and had their own personal flaws. They were capable of incredible feats, but at the same time, they were living, thinking creatures, which is not really what the Emperor really wanted. He wanted people who would fit into his machinery and his in his Imperium and help basically govern the rest of the military units for him so that he could do what he needed to do and they could run his war for him. And two of them went missing. It's one of the proprietary secrets of Games Workshop, what happened to those two. There's probably only like 3 people in their company who know what happened to those two, what their names were, and their actual history. If they even bothered with that. I'm sure there's got to be, though. But the whole idea is there are 18 remaining Primarchs. Some of them went to Chaos. One of them, who was given the highest honor of the whole lot, his name was Horus. Many of them are based on Earth mythologies. That's something you got to get used to with Games Workshop, is they were incredible magpies of culture. And Horus turned on the Emperor. He recruited some of his brothers to go and help him out. So these Primarchs took their troops and they turned and they attacked the Imperium. Initially, it was very successful as they had the advantage of surprise. And they did some pretty horrible things to the Imperium. But the Imperium just had numbers on their side, and they had some of the better tactical people on their side. So eventually the tides got turned back and Chaos was chased out of the Imperium. For the most part. But I, in my fiction, created a 21st Primarch. The intention of this person was that they were the Emperor's fallback plan. If everything else went wrong and the Emperor knew this was a chance, he created one other person for outside of the Imperium to try to preserve a kernel of culture that could then be injected back into the Imperium to try to reclaim it for his original vision, which was not necessarily this incredible monolithic structure which was kind of necessary to govern the 1,000,000 planets of the Imperium, but instead a force which followed order almost instinctively, worked to organically cast out chaos, and was inspired instead of dogmatic religion or these old traditions that they didn't really believe in, basically a general welfare for all that could absorb everything into it without having to fire a single shot, ideally. And so this one last person was basically encompassed what little of the Emperor's capacity for compassion and mercy and forethought, and his name was Cadmus. And Cadmus was not like his brothers, because he wasn't part of that batch. In fact, the Emperor knew that Chaos would absolutely flip if they found out that he had made another Primarch. So what he did was, as soon as he created him, he formed the germ of his embryonic state. He immediately packed it in a satellite sandwiched into a rock and fired it out at the outskirts of the Imperium. And baby Cadmus would grow up in this station which the Emperor called Manhattan, after Earth history. And while he was there was a powerful artificial intelligence crafted by the Emperor himself, which taught him everything the Emperor wanted him to know. This gave him an actual, almost personal understanding of the Emperor and his desires. So he kind of grew up, as a scholar with this vast amount of resources, and all of the different Primarchs were given different traits. Like, for example, Leman Russ, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, he himself was granted great honor, animal instincts, and savagery, but at the same time an incredible amount of bravery, toughness, and fortitude. So his Space Wolves got those traits from him too. So they're selfless, they throw themselves into battle to protect the innocent, and they are absolutely fierce and fearless. Well, Cadmus was not that, and he didn't have a legion of Space Marines. Instead, the gift that he was given was the insight into technology. He was basically given stolen power that the Emperor took from the Void Dragon, which was an ancient creature called a Catan that the Emperor had bested on Mars, and he took this creature's mastery of all things technological, and he stole some of that power and gave it to Cadmus, as well as some of his own personal understanding. So Cadmus was able to do incredible things that I had reasoned would be kind of an interesting thing to explore with technology. So, the problem is, Cadmus revealed himself to some of the Inquisitors of the Imperium. Inquisitors are people who are thick special forces. They go out and they dig and they find out where treason is rooted, or alien cults, or sometimes chaos and demons, and they root it out aggressively, and then they call on the rest of the forces of the Imperium to crush it. Well, these Inquisitors eventually found out that there's a person out on the outskirts of the Imperium who is currently working on recruiting anybody that he can, and his internal personal charisma was such that he was transforming all of these people, even rivals in some cases, into allies that were beginning to weld themselves into what was called the Arcadian Concordiat. And backing this up, his knowledge of technology was to the point where he was starting to create super science beyond which the Imperium hadn't really known, into an area that even the Eldar, Space Elves, they were starting to look at and go, whoa, you're starting to perfect some of the things that we'd had lying around for a million years. You've gotten that stuff and you're actually making that stuff even better. And we hadn't really innovated that stuff forever. So Cadmus was talking with the Eldar. He was talking with the Tau, another alien race that Imperium had tangled with a bit. And instead of saying, you'll follow me or else, he's like, hey, I've got a better way. Doesn't need to be through conflict. All it takes is everybody putting in a little bit of effort, capping it off with the technology that I can help us bring, and we can all work together to make better. And we can have a paradise where all the different races have a say. They live in a state of luxury, and they can be free to express themselves or to delve into the disciplines of technology and order that basically will help counter this entire insane universe going on around us. And he was given an artifact by the Emperor which helped him out to do this, but all the same, this was a scary thing. Some of these Inquisitors were dyed-in-the-wool, absolutely would crush anybody who spoke up against the Imperium, but this Cadmus was not pro-Imperium. He was for this Arcadian Concordiat on the outskirts. And the Inquisitors were kind of curious to see what was going on there in case, they had to call on the Imperial Navy to come and crush this. But enough of them got swayed that eventually these Death Watch folk got called in to oversee what was going on. And they got a meeting with Cadmus, who appears to just be a normal human in overalls and carrying a lot of tools around him. And at one point he actually said, I am the greatest threat to your Imperium that exists. Because if I carry through my will, your Imperium will become part of the Concordiat. Because we will give your people a better life, free of the taint of chaos, and free of this creeping paranoia and paralyzing devaluation of life, that all the people within the Concordiat will be able to reach their potential, their maximum. Whereas right now, they're just a tool, and they're kept small and mean and worthless. Just a tiny iota of what they could be. And every single person that we bring onto our side, we take tiny little things that your Imperium won't miss and make them great people within our ranks. Even the least of the people among our ranks who don't have ambitions, who don't have great gifts to offer, hey, at the very least, they offer some of their energy, and they can cultivate goodwill and help to power the sense of order. And with the things that we have in place, they aren't nobody's a danger of going off and committing violent crimes and feeding the forces of chaos. And they're like, we don't know if we believe that. One of them actually pulled a gun on Cadmus and looked like they were ready to splatter him, and Cadmus was like, well, you have to make your decision. If you can pull that trigger, and there will be some people who will say you did the right thing, but you may have signed the deal away that makes sure that chaos wins in this entire affair. And they didn't pull the trigger. They let everything go. Although they told him, if you try to do anything Imperium territory, we're going to stop you. And he said, well, you'll try. So then, that was the subtext. The only war group started on a planet that was being attacked by orcs and Tyranids. And we did some fairly normal only war conflict. They got to know how much fun barracks life is. It was pretty brutal and nasty, and they didn't enjoy that. And then they got sent out on missions, including some fighting of some traitors who had left the guard to try to find their own way and got in a fight, fought some orcs. That led to some pretty interesting conflict. And finally, they're just kind of, they're at the point where they really feel like they're lucky to have survived some of the nasty things they've had. Well, then it came down to, well, we're having to attack a hive. This hive is a massive megacity with billions of people living in it. And they're like, we have to take this and root out the traitors and other things going on here. So the group, and there was a purpose to this, and I'll explain that in a second, but the group went into the city, went through a number of challenges, and eventually they got up the command structure of the city itself. Wherein they found out that Chaos Space Marines had infiltrated the city, and it wasn't looking good. It looked like there was going to be some big ritual that was going to consecrate this entire place to demons and turn this entire place into a nightmare world. It just so happened that the Death Watch group was also on this planet, and they were also inside of this hive. They were actually fighting a couple squads of Chaos Space Marines, despite the fact there were only 4 or 5 of them at a time. They actually lost their leader, an Ultramarine, who made one tactical error and got gunned down by a lot of friendly fire. Or a lot of hostile fire, I should say. So, things were looking pretty dark, but I had a plan here. My intention was this. I let them make the Imperial Guardsmen because I was going to have them killed brutally, to kind of impart the feeling that this is very grim. They made these characters, they got to know them, and I was going to kill them off utterly through the story. It was going to make sense. I had the situation all set up. They were going to face some Chaos Space Marines they had no chance of fighting off. And then the entire thing, they were going to do the last thing they were going to do, which was going to help those Space Marines by opening up a barrier and helping them to complete their task. And then they were going to die on cue. And wouldn't you know it, one of the people actually killed one of the Space Marines with a screwdriver. The most improbable, ridiculous critical hit system. Exploding dice. Just wrong. Just wrong. The least likely person to have done it, he was the operator of the group, and he went and jammed his screwdriver in the Space Marine's nuclear power pack and vented his everything bad into the suit, which flash killed the Chaos Priest. Blew up, knocked him flying. He didn't die. It was amazing, but he didn't. The group was in rough shape, but they got to do the thing that they were supposed to do to let the Space Marines go. And at the same time, there was an action going on by Cadmus and his forces. He was watching the conflict, seeing what could get saved on the planet, because he had a pretty good feeling that the Imperium was going to completely destroy the planet to stop Chaos from getting a foothold if it went poorly. It only really would have been that poorly, though, if the Space Marines had failed their mission, and they weren't. So, but he was there in system, grabbing people he wanted to save who had skills that would help out his Arcadian Concordia. The group of Imperial Guardsmen found the planetary governor's emergency escape shuttle and decided they were going to steal it. They got into it and were flying out, and it was going to go badly. This was on purpose, but I was going to kill them in that shuttle. And I was talking to them after that particular game, before I pulled the trigger and utterly crushed them, and they were telling me how happy they were playing these characters, how much they really liked playing these guardsmen. They were fun. It was great to play this irreverent band of jokers who just, didn't have a chance, but they pulled off some of these incredible hijinks, and they were just so much fun. And they basically begged me not to kill them off. I am a benevolent god in my position as game master sometimes, so I didn't. Oh, the ship got destroyed, yes, but Cadmus rescued them. He recognized that they were people who were capable of getting things done, and he saved them before they were utterly obliterated. The Space Marines got away as well. The city was destroyed, but not in such a way that Chaos was able to take it. And they accomplished their missions. But the characters for the Only War campaign, they were given a choice. They're like, we could put you back with your people, and we could mind wipe a couple of people so that nobody really asks questions about how you got out. We could do that. Or you can come with us. You could take the blue pill and go back to your people, or you can take the red pill and join us. And if you do that, we'll show you how things really are, what you've really been fighting for, and what it means, and how to do better than that. And they all chose that. He was persuasive. So, they were taken to Arcadia, the central planet for the Arcadian Concordia. And they basically were not indoctrinated. First of all, their bodies were completely fixed of any problems. The technology level was not quite Star Trek level, but pretty close. Nano machines were something they found out they could use. So, you know, they were fixed. Their bodies were basically perfectly reforged. They were like, hey, you didn't know this, but this disease was going to kill you in 12 years, but now you're fine. One who lost a leg, that was fixed instantly. And so here they are. Their bodies are fit and hale and hearty, and actually a little bit stronger and quicker for the work that was done, basically kind of improving them in subtle ways. Mostly in BioWare, wasn't cybernetics or anything. And Cadmus came up to them and said, hey, you are one of those rare fulcrums in the universe that chaos and order kind of tilt around the kind of things that you do. You're the kind of people it would be really good to have around me. How'd you like to be my bodyguards? I'll give you some cool stuff to play with so that you can do some missions for me, and you'll get my own special attention on these things. It's going to be really dangerous, but you're going to get to do some really cool stuff. And they all just, yeah, we'll do that. We love this stuff. And this gave me a chance to really design super high-tech stuff for them. So they got to play with really big things that eventually dwarfs what the Space Marines are doing. But we keep going back to the Space Marines doing other things throughout the galaxy that don't necessarily have anything to do with the Arcadians. And then we switch back over to the Arcadians and what they're doing. So I was kind of telling the story along the way. And eventually the Arcadians start working on this noble, bright strategy to save the universe. In a couple of ways. Even being so bold as to going into the Imperium and trying to bring back to life one of the Primarchs who was almost killed, Reboot Guilliman. And they succeeded. They went in and got him out of his stasis and immediately applied Arcadian-level medicine, which put him back in order, which was pretty cool. And they definitely had some fun toys to play with. I mean, we were really scraping the top end of what you could do with that system. Their characters were ridiculous. And I had all kinds of fun and crazy weapons and armor designs for them. Technology where I need to know this. Blink, my head computer instantly tells me what I need to know. All kinds of things like that. And then whenever Cadmus was around, it got even better, because all of a sudden he could make technology even better than what they had. He could make it their idealized, perfect ideal of what, of what armor could be. It almost impenetrable, perfect armor. So just him being around was a massive shift of power. And I didn't have Cadmus there too often, because I had ideas for what Cadmus was going to be, and he wasn't a fighter. He had no offensive abilities, just what other people were able to do for him. So I didn't introduce him to a lot of things, but the group got to do, some interesting things. They were able to save people from certain destruction on certain worlds, and they were able to take on a Tyranid space fleet, and they all kinds of really kind of neat little ideas that, as long as you don't stay a slave to the idea that everything has to be grim and there are no great victories and everything like that, I threw that out the window for that campaign. Which people who really love the Warhammer 40,000 universe probably wouldn't have been so enamored with. They would have cried foul on a number of things, but it was my story, my world, my players were enjoying it. Unfortunately, as often happens in these games, when they go for a long time, there was some unrest that happened between different players, and eventually one of the major drivers of action in the group, because he really was a person who always wanted to do things, he broke off. He left the group, which was unfortunate, because that really did cause the rest of my interest to kind of curtail. Too many threads that were tied up around his characters, and the entire thing just kind of spiraled after that point, and we all kind of agreed that it was over when he was gone. But I had some fun ideas, and I can actually reveal them now, which I think I told them in the end. Basically, what was going to happen was they were going to have a couple of other missions that were going to try to recruit a couple of the Primarchs who were out of action, and they were going to come together in this great big thrust into the Imperium. And the idea was they were going to bring the Emperor back, the Emperor of Man. And this is like the ultimate thing, because if he comes back, he gets to fix the Imperium. All the stuff that's going wrong, suddenly, the Emperor can fix that. And the Emperor and his Primarchs that were loyal, and Cadmus, this is all going to be great. And just when they brought him back, the idea was this. Well, my idea. I mean, again, this is purely my own fiction at this point, deviating off completely from anything from, Games Workshop, just using theirs as the framework. But when they brought him back, what they were going to find out was that the Emperor was actually fragmented himself, because in his last action, while he was still mortal, he was engaged in a battle with his son Horus for the fate of the Imperium, basically. And the Emperor won and obliterated Horus with his powers, but was mortally wounded himself, which forced them to put him into suspended animation and to just keep him around to keep the Imperium going. Well, what I had in mind was that in the act of destroying Horus, he really didn't have it in him to do it. Despite all the horrible things that Horus had been guilty of, he still wasn't able to completely obliterate him. So a shard of Horus was still trapped inside the Emperor, and the more people, the more psychic force that was sustaining the Emperor, that was drafted from people who were just prisoners. They were terrified. They didn't want to sacrifice themselves to the Emperor to keep him intact. That fed Horus. Their fears and their terror and their, in some cases, hatred of the situation they were in kind of forced Horus to the fore. And of course, the ones that allowed themselves to be martyred, basically, they willingly went off to sustain the Emperor. Those actually reinforced the Emperor. So when the Emperor comes back after 10,000 years of all this negativity and all these people that were thrown to their deaths for the Emperor, well, Horus was in charge. And when he stepped down, the Emperor was going to be a bit different. Eventually realizing, as Reboot and Magnus was also going to be one that they were going to reclaim. I had a fun little story for that. Magnus' psychic sense was going to say, hey, I've felt that psychic presence before, but that isn't my father. That's my brother Horus. And there's going to be this huge pitched battle as the four chaos gods, Slanesh, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, were going to show up in the throne room. Their prime avatars were going to be there. And the Cadmus and the Primarchs that they had recovered were going to basically have this battle for the Emperor's soul right there, which eventually the Emperor was going to win if they did well, and was going to cast out Cadmus and basically become the god of order to stand opposite of the chaos gods who had run roughshod, and that was going to create a kind of a, if not necessarily a paradise, at the very least it was going to create a much better universe than the one that had just been war all the time and chaos everywhere. So it was a fun idea. I thought it would have been a great one-time thing to do. The Games Workshop would never have approved anything like that, even though there would have been some of the most awesome set pieces that you could have imagined for that universe. Getting to play with a fiction like that was a lot of fun, especially because at least 2 of the people in that group knew far more about the Warhammer universe than I did. But by doing this on my own and kind of going off in my own direction, I made it mine. And that took them out of their comfort zone because they didn't always know what to expect. They didn't know how far my ambitions ranged, which is pretty much some of the most ambitious stuff. You know, actually going to the center of the fiction to derive the plot. That was pretty cool. Unfortunately, we didn't finish it. It would have taken about another good 8 months of gameplay to get to that end. And quite honestly, like I said, once the group fragmented a bit, we lost a lot of our momentum, and it just didn't feel right going to the end that way. So we closed it off early. I kind of gave them a thumbnail of what would have happened, and that was it. But that was my grand Warhammer 40K story, bridging both Space Marines of Deathwatch, who would have been there in that final battle too, by the way. It would have been awesome, because the Cadmus had recruited any Space Marines who were discomfited, fragmented off, or the rest of their legion had been butchered off. He offered them a place as the White Templars, who were dedicated to the forces of order and the Arcadian order in a way to try to redeem the Imperium. And he's perfectly capable of undoing hypno-indoctrination, so he gave them a choice to actually make their own free will option to join or not. And oh, did he give them some toys. The group would have been allowed to do that if they had wanted to, and even if they didn't, they could have still stuck with Deathwatch, and they could have been in that final battle too. It would have been really cool. But it never happened. It's a regret, not a huge regret of mine, but it is a regret that we never got to finish that. And it's really pretty much impossible to do that now, and I don't think I could ever run that campaign again. But it's nice to think about what might have happened and kind of revisit some of those ideas that I had before they get lost into the ether of plenty of other campaigns coming in the future, and characters that I have yet to meet that themselves will be mighty giants in the pantheon of great characters that I've met. So here's looking forward to that. But that's a story of my gaming past. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Maybe this might inspire some ideas of your own, but it's a part of my nature, in that I look at a game and I think, oh, that's kind of interesting, but what could I do with it beyond what's there? Make it my own. And again, I was fighting from behind when my players knew more about the Warhammer universe than I did, so I stretched off in my own direction. It's like running a game of Star Wars when everybody else has seen all the movies so many more times than you and are quoting lines. What's the possible way that you can run the game and still keep them interested and excited, and they don't just quote back to you what you screwed up? Send them out to the Outer Rim, where they've never been. You're part of the universe, and let them see a brand new facet of the universe that doesn't show up in print or books or movies or anything like that. Hey, it worked pretty well, honestly, and I've been using that ever since I started running Star Wars. So, pretty good strategy, I think, and all in all, I hope you found the story to be fascinating. So, until next time, my friends, and tomorrow will bring another time, because COVID is still happening. I'll have another tale for you, I'm sure of it. So until then, have a good night, and farewell.